This is chapter 4, Only a God Knows All. But before the chapter itself, there's a kind of a separate page to start part 2. The 6 tools for thinking are 1, so far as I know, 2, up to a point, 3, to me, 4, the what index, 5, the when index, 6, the where index. And then there's a little boxed piece of text. In the next 6 chapters, you will find a set of 6 tools that will enable you to increase your skill in making reliable verbal maps. These tools are words or phrases that you can add to your verbal maps. You will find that these phrases will act almost magically in helping you mature your thinking habits. To make it easier for you to get acquainted with the tools for thinking, they will appear in bold-faced type throughout this book. Once you learn to use these tools, you will be amazed at how such simple and familiar phrases can do so much to increase your thinking ability. Tool number 1, so far as I know. Chapter 4, Only a God Knows All. And we start with a quote from Wendell Johnson. An attitude of this kind, "You can't tell me anything about that," has an effect quite similar to that of a pus sac in the brain. Mrs. Gladstone was downstairs entertaining guests who had just arrived for a dinner party. The conversation turned to the Bible, and there was a lively argument on the meaning of a certain passage. Soon, one of the guests, hoping to end the discussion, remarked devoutly, "There is one above who knows all." The cloud vanished from Mrs. Gladstone's face as she smiled sunnily and said, "Yes, and William will be down in a few minutes." In spite of Mrs. Gladstone's testimony to the contrary, so far as I know, no human being knows all about anything. Can you think of anything about which your knowledge is complete? Large or small, old or new, can you answer every question about an automobile or a grain of sand, a pencil or an inch of sewing thread, a BB shot or a human being? Suppose you wanted to devote your lifetime to the study of a single lead pencil. We'll pause a moment to consider that, and let me take a drink. So we're going back to your lifetime of studying a single lead pencil. Could you learn all about it? You might pick out a nice yellow one with a rubber eraser. You could then sit down and try to describe it as thoroughly as possible, giving the exact measurements and telling all you could about its construction and its uses. But to know everything about the pencil, you would have to learn about the wood and the individual tree from which it was made. You would need to know the details of how the rubber was made. And you must not forget the metal in the little band holding the rubber. Then you would need to learn everything about the lead, the glue, the paint, and the gold letters stamped on it. You would then be well along in your attempt to learn all about the pencil. After a few years of study on the outside, you might begin to take the pencil apart and examine the inside details of that individual pencil. You would need to section it and make thousands of microscope slides to become acquainted with each fiber of wood and grain of graphite. And after you had exhausted your microscopic examination, you would then be ready to study the pencil from a molecular and atomic point of view. Each molecule collides with other molecules many millions or billions of times per second, depending on the kind of molecule and the temperature. According to Sir Oliver Lodge, 250 million atoms in a row only measure an inch, and 100,000 electrons in a row equal the diameter of an atom. If you could count them at a rate of 3 per second, 24 hours a day, it would take thousands of years just to count the atomic particles in your pencil. So far as I know, you could spend many lifetimes studying a single pencil from an atomic point of view and still not know all about it. Fortunately, we human beings manage to get along in this world without having complete verbal maps. No mechanic knows all about an automobile, but a good mechanic knows enough about it to keep it running fairly well. No doctor knows all about the human body, but they have become efficient in handling many of our ills. No person knows all about the art of cooking, but there are a lot of cooks who are good enough for my money. But you may be saying to yourself, ever since I got out of grammar school, I've known that no one knew all about anything. The trouble is, we know that, but frequently we do not act as though we knew it. As the old saying goes, everyone knows it, but the idea has not occurred to everyone. The key to open-mindedness. When we really understand the significance of the fact that we don't know all about anything, it is easy to acquire habits of open-mindedness. For instance, if you did know all about something, there would be no sense in keeping an open mind. There would be no need to listen to what anyone else had to tell you, or to keep your eyes open in surveying the territory. Nothing would be new to you. Everything you planned would work out perfectly because your maps would be complete and have complete predictability. You would be justified in refusing to listen to what others had to say, and you could forever renounce surveying the territory for new or different ideas. We have all heard speeches on the desirability and the necessity of keeping open minds, but we are seldom told how to do it. The way to get and keep an open mind is to repeat to yourself, I can't know all about anything. No one else knows all about anything. Therefore, I have no right to close my mind. I must watch for important facts that may have been overlooked. Some hidden factors may be found that will help me make my maps more adequate. Edison said, we don't know 1/1,000,000% about anything. The people who make the most adequate verbal maps are those who are thoroughly aware of the incompleteness of their knowledge. As Cicero put it, I am not ashamed to confess that I am ignorant of what I do not know. Sometimes you hear people giving this advice. Never act until you have all the facts. However wise that kind of advice may sound, it is impractical. Since we never have all the facts, we must decide when we have enough facts to make adequate verbal maps and then act on them. Life, said Samuel Butler, is the art of drawing sufficient conclusions from insufficient premises. One moment, please. The tools for thinking. Basically, this is a handbook for straight thinking. The business of a handbook is to tell you how to translate knowledge into action. You will find in this chapter, parentheses, and each of the next 5 chapters, close, a phrase you can use in your everyday thinking that will automatically start you using the principles for straight thinking presented here. The phrases are called the tools for thinking. The little phrase that is going to remind us that our maps are not complete and that we should keep an open mind is "so far as I know." For example, instead of saying, "she thinks only of herself," say, "so far as I know, she thinks only of herself." Do not be misled by the simplicity of these tools. Everyone uses them occasionally, but few understand clearly the principles behind them. Because they are so obvious and well known, do not make the mistake of concluding this is child stuff that you already apply. Hard as it may be to believe, you will still be developing insight into the use of these tools for months and years to come. They will bring to you unbelievable new discoveries, knowledge, and experiences. Don't take my word for it. Try it and see. 6 Blind Men and the Elephant. Absolute certainty, said C.J. Kaiser, is a privilege of uneducated minds and fanatics. It is, for scientific folks, an unattainable ideal. The formula, "so far as I know," will remind us that we may know only one side of the story. Because of our limited observations, we may be like the 6 blind men who examined the elephant. The first blind man touched a leg and said, "An elephant is like a tree." The second caught hold of his tail and said, "Why, an elephant is just like a rope." The third touched his trunk. "Nonsense," he said. "An elephant is like a snake." The fourth one touched his ear. "Why, no, an elephant is like a leaf." Number 5 pushed his hand against the side of the elephant. "I think an elephant is like a wall." The 6th one came against the elephant's tusk. "You're all wrong," he said. "An elephant is like a sphere." Now these men were surveying the territory when they made their verbal maps. However, they did not survey enough of the territory to get an adequate picture. It is impossible for us to survey all the territory, and we can never be absolutely sure we have surveyed enough to give us an adequate picture, for no one can see all things, for no one can see things from all points of view. Plutarch tells of a Roman divorced from his wife who was blamed by friends for the separation. Was she not beautiful, they asked? Was she not chaste? The Roman held out his shoe for them to see and asked if it were good-looking and well-made. Yet, he added, none of you can tell me where it pinches me. A single new fact. Sometimes it takes only one new fact to upset our verbal maps. A museum in a certain eastern city was proud of its unusual attendance record. Obviously, the people in their fine city were well above average in their appreciation of the finer things in life. Recently, a little stone building was erected next door to the museum. During that next year, the attendance of the museum mysteriously fell off by over 100,000 visitors. What was the little stone building? It happened to be a comfort station. That's an old word for bathrooms. We shall forever need the formula, so far as I know, to remind us that one additional fact may turn up to knock the stuffing out of our present maps. I am not suggesting that you repeat the phrase, so far as I know, every time you open your mouth. People would think you were acting strangely. What I am advocating is that you feel inside of you that the verbal maps you make are not complete, and that important considerations could be missing. In other words, whenever you start spouting words of wisdom, whenever you say what you think is so, you should silently add, so far as I know, for your own benefit. When this attitude becomes deeply ingrained in your thinking, you will automatically be willing to hear what other people have to say. You will want to examine the facts that support their position. You will remember that no matter how much you know about something, parentheses, even though you are a world authority on it, close parentheses, there may still be facts that will enable you to mature your present ideas. We tend to believe what we first hear. Let us suppose Mr. Jones and Mr. Smith have an auto accident. Now, we know from experience that if we happen to hear about the accident first from Mr. Smith, he will convince us that it was all Jones' fault and that Jones ought to be put in jail. However, if we happen to talk to Mr. Jones first, he will explain to us in a thoroughly convincing manner just how Mr. Smith was to blame. On the basis of the facts we get from him, we will deplore the fact that such dangerous drivers as Mr. Smith are allowed on the road. When we realize that any one side, when it gets first shot, can usually present its own point of view in such a way as to convince us, we will understand the importance of learning to suspend our judgment by qualifying our verbal maps with so far as I know. We must not lend our ears and minds to only one side. We should try to understand both sides, or three sides, or a dozen sides, if a problem is that complex. I'm going to pause before the Bible instructs us. Okay. The Bible instructs us, prove all things, hold fast that which is good. 1 Thess, that's an abbreviation, maybe Thessalonians 5:21. But once we have adopted a certain point of view, it is difficult for us to be open-minded toward another way of thinking or acting. For what a man had rather were true, said Francis Bacon, he more readily believes. Little babies cannot fight as well as grown-ups. A new baby idea coming into our head cannot compete with the old grown-up ones we have been embracing all our lives. We have to let the new ideas come in, grow, and mature. Frequently, it is necessary to try to understand new ideas for days, weeks, or even years. When we feel that we have done our best to understand a new point of view, we should then unleash our old ideas and have a real battle royal. The new ideas will have grown up and matured, and they will need no protection then. In order to understand ideas that are different from the ones we now have, we must develop a perspective on them. If we argue with each little point when we first hear it, we will not be able to see the whole picture. If an army marched through a narrow gate, man by man, it would be easy to defeat. The same thing applies to understanding a new point of view. If we knock off the details one by one, we are not giving them a chance as a whole. We must let them come out, line up, acquire their greatest strength, and then we must oppose them with whatever strength there is in our present point of view. And the ideas that remain after the clash of opinions has taken place are the ones we want. They are the truths that have emerged victorious. It is good to rub and polish our minds against those of others, said Montaigne, something like that. The tool, so far as I know, helps us to open our minds so that we can have a real clash of opinions and not just an unequal, unfair farce. Take pride in open-mindedness. A closed mind is not a mind. It is a machine. It automatically sprouts what is already in it. An open mind wants the truth that comes from the clash of opinions. A closed mind is only interested in continuing to believe whatever it now believes. According to John Dewey, open-mindedness may be defined as freedom from prejudice, partisanship, and such other habits as close the mind and make it unwilling to consider new problems and entertain new ideas. But it is something more active and positive than these words suggest. It is very different from empty-mindedness. While it is hospitality to new themes, facts, ideas, questions, it is not the kind of hospitality that would be indicated by hanging out a sign, "Come right in, there is nobody at home." It includes an active desire to listen to more sides than one, to give heed to facts from whatever source they come, to give full attention to alternative possibilities, to recognize the possibility of error even in the beliefs that are dearest to us. And that's from How We Think by John Dewey. The only people who make no mistakes, said H.L. Wayland, are dead people. I saw a man last week who has not made a mistake for 4,000 years. He was a mummy in the Egyptian department of the British Museum. We should try to make people feel that they are invited to point out facts that will help us mature our verbal maps. We should make it clear that we do not regard a criticism or a suggestion as a slap at our ego. We don't claim to know all about anything anyhow. A man, said Pope, should never be ashamed to own he has been in the wrong, which is but saying, in other words, that he is wiser today than he was yesterday. To sum up, since our maps are not complete, we have no right to close our minds on any subject. We must silently add, so far as I know, to everything we say, because we never know when new facts will turn up that will enable us to mature our verbal maps. We must remember that absolute certainty is a privilege of uneducated minds and fanatics. It is, for scientific folks, an unattainable ideal. And that's the end of chapter 4, tool number 1, so far as I know. Phew. This is 9/28/2022 at 3:32 p.m. That was the first tool. The next tool is Think in Terms of Degrees, chapter 5, tool number 2, up to a point. I do have some further thoughts on his statements about scientific facts and scientific folks and the unattainable ideal of absolute certainty. And I feel that Korzybski also made that point when he once said that you can kind of sum up general semantics as taking the attitude, I don't know, let's see. And that kind of sums up science's attitude. It's belief that you find the truth by experimenting in the natural world. Now, it does have limitations, which I think is what Laurie Anderson is talking about on the cover of Big Science and in her masterwork, United States, parts 1 through 4, when she comes out wearing a white coat and sunglasses that completely black out our view of her eyes and her view of the outside world, representing science, that there's more to the world than science, and that's kind of what Ojai science goes toward. I don't want to say that's all there is to Ojai science. Let's see, what else? There's the usual notes about Taming Your Mind, which is copyright 1975 by Ken Keyes Jr., and I believe that year is the year he somehow got the copyright back from the publisher of the original book, How to Develop Your Thinking Ability, which is copyright 1950. Science and Sanity, I believe the first edition is copyright 1933, and the book that I actually use physically more often is Selections from Science and Sanity, which is currently available from Amazon and I believe in print, which is copyright 2010, the Institute of General Semantics, which is an interesting way to describe it, but I won't go into that here. And what else should I say? This YouTube video and audio work and audio visual work is copyright the Tuna Genome Project and licensed under a Creative Commons share-alike and attribution license. And I think that's about it. I want to make the last thing, thank you for listening or viewing, depending on what you're doing. I'd be interested in your comments, either here or at OVAC or in general. And I promise to only say this at the very end of each video or audio. Please subscribe and press the notification bell. And actually, I do want to say that since I'm doing these all as live stream, if you have comments or questions, you could put them up, I believe, if you get that notification. And I'll find out more about that as time goes on. Okay, we're going to stop streaming now. Bye.